Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. So the land acquisition bill, well, the new one, the amendment to the earlier bill, is now through in the Lok Sabha, but it is going to run into considered and considerable opposition in the Rajya Sabha. But this being one of the most contentious debates of our time, and something that lays down all sorts of major questions as to rights of farmer, rights of industry, what is the path that India should take, what is the role that the government should take. We thought it appropriate one more time to get some of the top experts in the field together to really try and understand once and for all what is at stake in the land acquisition bill. Is the new amended bill that the government has put out, will it eventually pass? Is it going to go to the select committee? And what should actually happen in this? So, as I said, a whole range of experts joining us on that. Sudhanshu Trivedi, spokesperson of the BJP, right here with us in the studio. It's great to have with us Mohammed Khan, who's an advocate, one of the people who, as in the capacity as OSD to Jairam Ramesh, was very crucially involved in drafting LARR 2013, the earlier bill. So he was really involved in the drafting of that and can shed some light on some of the finer points. Gardner Harris, South Asia correspondent of the New York Times, is with us. Jaiveer, Shergill, joining us from the Congress Party. MK Venu, Executive Editor, Amar Ujala Group. Great to have you with us. Ajayveer Jhakar is the chairman of the Bharat Krishak Samaj. Thanks for being with us. Sanjay Kumar is a professor at CSDS who's done a lot of studies actually as to what the farmers really seem to be wanting, because a lot of this is couched in this is good for farmers, bad for farmers. What is it that farmers want? You've done a study on this, so we'll get your views in. And we're being joined by Ajit Gulabchand, the chairman MD of Hindustan Construction Company, and finally by Chengal Reddy, who's the Secretary General of the Consortium of Indian Farmers Association. So as I said, all experts would have represented in some way or the other. Sudhanshu Trivedi, this seems to have become the first big battleground for the Modi government, and it's one on which in many cases it's a really tough battle to fight, because in a sense when the opposition is saying you're anti-farmer, that becomes a political hot potato. Also one of the reasons why Mohammed Khan's bill actually went through with almost complete majority. BJP itself supported it.
There are two aspects related to this. One is the intention of the government and of the Bharatiya Janata Party towards the interest of the farmers, and other is the ground realities of this land acquisition bill. As far as the intention is concerned, I would like to just go 2 or 3 sentences. It was our previous BJP government which brought down the interest rate on agricultural loan from whooping 14 to 18% to 8 to 9%.
Okay, that's as general stuff. Let's just keep it to the LARR. Right. I mean, otherwise we get into an open-ended discussion on who's good or bad for farmers. Let's just keep it to the Land Acquisition Act.
And one more thing, only Kisan credit card, the Kisan helpline, and also the Farmers Commission for the first time in the history. Then subsequent BJP government brought down the interest to 4% and to 0%.
Dhanshu, I will grant
now
you
I will come to
in farmers in
now
mind.
I am
let's come
coming to this land acquisition bill. Yeah. As far as this bill is concerned, whatever the voices were raised cutting across the party line on 27th of June 2014, whether it was the Kerala government or the Karnataka government, UP government or the West Bengal government, on certain problems which are occurring in this land acquisition bill, for example, in rural infrastructure, for irrigation. If you are unable to acquire land for irrigation, for a school in a village or any other thing, which we tried to put out of that consent clause.
Yeah.
We have tried to add this. For example, in the defense purpose, there was a clause, we can acquire the land without consent clause, but only in case of urgency. For example, it means if there is a war, then only you can acquire the land. Otherwise, there will always be a legal proceeding. Why this urgency? If we want to have a nuclear warhead there, should we tell the entire world that we are going to have a nuclear warhead there? So, for defense purpose, we have done away with the word urgency. So,
I get a lot of. I want to come to the specifics, because look, I get what you're saying, that there are certain areas that maybe the land acquisition, the previous bill went too far. Mohammed Khan, let me put that to you actually. A lot of people say that, look, where did this all start? You had the 1896 Land Acquisition Act, which was a completely obnoxious legislation, widely misused. Everyone was utilizing it to really rip off the farmers and take the land away from them at cheap prices and build it. So you needed to change that. There's a view that when your bill came about, it went too far in the other direction. So as a result, it became virtually impossible to acquire any land at all. And that, as Sudhanshu said, is also bad for the country. Would you think that's a fair criticism? Did you go too far?
Well, actually, first I'd like to begin by addressing something that Sudhanshuji said. He's very right in pointing out that on the 27th of June, barely a month after the government was sworn in, they called a meeting of all the revenue ministers of various states. The agenda of this meeting was to find out what the problems with the implementation of the bill are. Now, we have just one concern at that point of time. The bill came into force in January of 2014, barely 6 months prior to this meeting being called, and it was never truly implemented because of the fact that the Model Code of Conduct came in, say, at the end of February. So, when you're calling a meeting of revenue ministers to gauge what are the challenges of implementing such a bill, our first question is, have you tried implementing it? What are these problems that have arisen when the bill could not legally have been implemented in the first place? So, to our mind, that meeting seemed as if it began with the agenda set from the very outset, right? I mean, the agenda wasn't how do we make the Land Acquisition Act better? It was what are the problems with the bill? Let's figure those out, right? And from that point onwards, we saw ground being laid towards the amendments that we saw brought in December of last year.
But did you go too far in the other direction?
We don't think so. In fact, we are criticized from one side of not going far enough. In fact, the original bill began with compensation set at 6 times the market value. We reduced it to 4. We had many more safeguards built into the Act earlier. We had a Secretaries Committee, but out of deference to the concerns raised by industry, we dropped the committee itself. So yes, this bill represents a grand compromise, actually, to our mind.
His point is you never even tried to implement that, the new bill.
How the bill has gone too far, I can just give you one example. The 80% or 70% consent clause. You know, after 30 years, we were able to get a clear majority government. From independence till today, no government was formed with more than 50% vote. So getting 50% is so difficult. So if you are putting a clause of 80%, it means you are virtually giving a position in which nothing can happen. And second thing, today we are living in the era of globalization. It's not just in India we have to get a piece of land. If you're not getting here, you name a single country in the world, whether developing or developed, which is having these type of clauses.
Let's say you want to let's say you want to make a defense facility somewhere, or you want to build a highway. Or a dam. It's not necessary that
colony, if you want to get a legislation passed by 80% majority, I think everybody will agree that it will not go. Any group, if you are putting 80%, you are trying to get it too far. That's why I'm saying it is too far.
Which Vikram indicated, the study which we did about acquiring land from the farmers. Farmers are willing to give you land if you want to build up school and hospital. Yeah. Huge majority of farmers came up with this opinion that they are willing to give land. But if you say we want to build,
that's why this was the problem with the intentions of the previous government.
Which takes the wind out of their sails. The status is today, subject to creation, 67 projects are being held up, worth 4 lakh crore. Out of that, only 7 projects, big projects, are being held up because of acquisition problem. The ratio that this is causing is 87% to 13%.
Actually, yeah, Vikram, there's this false correlation, linking of economic growth with land acquisition, one-to-one. There is no one-to-one correlation. Economic growth slipped because of 100 other reasons, right? And the other point is what Sanjay was saying. Farmers are willing to give up land for projects, but there's a problem today is one of trust. The state in the past 20 to 30 years has not played an honest broker. The essential democratic principle of consent is very important because conceptually you can have aggressive capitalist growth and it will give you good economic 9-10% growth, but will it be socially inclusive? That's the other question. So these democratic institutions, these legislations are meant to temper growth so that it is more equitable. So you that's the perspective in which you have to see it. I mean,
Gardner?
I think one of the depressing things about this is, of course, this Modi government has not really come up with very big bang reforms. Everything has been extremely modest. And this attempt to change, well, no, I think that this is, frankly, a fairly modest effort to amend some things that I think a lot of the business community felt very concerned about in the land bill. And even this is getting caught up in very difficult politics and may not pass. So I think from the outsider's point of view...
from an outside point of view, you're saying it's important that this amendment must go through because at the end of the day, it becomes a signaling mechanism.
Absolutely.
Ajit Gulabchand, can I get you in on this?
There are about 300 billion or 30 crore new jobs to be created in the next 20 years. These are kids that are already born but will come into the job market every year, about 1.5 crores a year. So it's such a huge and gargantuan task to create those jobs. United States of America, the largest economy in the world, employs 13.5 crore or 135 million people, which means we have to create two America-sized economies to create these jobs. When you look at that enormity of that challenge, I think we should look at any of the rules and laws we made in the context of, can we get that kind of investment in and that many jobs created, for which we need infrastructure, we need a lot of manufacturing to come in, and other services as well. So when you look at the magnitude of the problem and the speed with which we have to do it, I think we are making a mistake in debating the wrong things for the time being. Second important thing, if we are so concerned about it, the right to property was removed. So we are discussing again property when you have removed right to property as a fundamental right. The constitution makers had made it a fundamental right, and it cannot be abrogated. Eminent domain exists even in a country like America, where you're allowed to shoot somebody who crosses your property. So in this case, you do need it. And government has done the right thing. In fact, it's not gone enough to make this bill workable. The bill in its existing form was unworkable any which way you see it. Okay. We wouldn't have got any development whatsoever.
What is it that farmers really want? Now, your study, which I did read in some detail, seemed to indicate that something like 76% of farmers said we don't want to farm anymore. And if that is the case, and that is what the majority of farmers really want, then Ajit's point becomes relevant, that you have to find ways of having manufacturing clusters, service clusters, other things in rural India. You can't then have all of these farmers who don't want to farm coming to the cities, being on footpaths or in slums, not knowing what to do and living in a state of poverty because they don't want to be farming anymore and there are no facilities in rural areas.
If you relate it to some of the other questions which we asked in the survey, they are not majority, huge majority of them don't want to get engaged or continue doing farming because the lack of infrastructure. They raise questions about seed, electricity, drinking water facility, and if I'm sure if such infrastructural facilities are provided to the existing farming community, I think this proportion of 70% not willing to do farming, not willing to be engaged in the farming, that would go down drastically. It's not that the majority of them, they don't want to.
It's a chicken and the egg situation. So, but now to provide those facilities, the government will no doubt argue that how do we provide those facilities without acquiring some land to provide those facilities? So that becomes.
But the whole debate is about whether when you acquire land for public utility purposes. In this survey, as I mentioned earlier also, about school, like hospitals, they are not worried. They are all willing to give you land.
That's not necessarily the case. And I'll tell you why that's not necessarily the case. Let's say you want to build a dam somewhere. Let's say you want to build something or a highway is going through. It may be good for society, but if you come to me individually and I'm a farmer, if you're saying I'm taking your land away to do something which is good for the neighborhood, I will say, no, I don't want you to do that. Please take his land away instead. So, I agree with the project. Don't take my land away, take his land away. That is where the issue comes, where a private person may not be willing to make that sacrifice for a public good. That's where the issue is.
Let me as a farmers organization, let me just say that UPA put the house on fire and BJP has added fuel to that fire by having all these acquisitions. As a farmer, there's no reason for the industry to acquire my land or the government to acquire my land. As a farmer, I will say that I'm willing to give my land at a fair price for a railway line, for a canal, for roads, for airport, for defense purposes, and all those public utility purposes. I have no problem of giving the land, provided I have a fair compensation. But if you want to take my land away and give it to the industry, because the industry, see, like Ajit Gulabchandji said, in the US, if anybody walks onto your property, you can shoot him. He's quoting that as an example. But you walk into in India, you walk to a farmer's land and throw him out of his farm, and that he thinks is a good thing to do. I mean, it's ridiculous that, let me finish. It's ridiculous that the government should even enact a law where you can take a farmer's land without his consent. When you have over 200,000 hectares of land available with existing government institutions, public sector enterprises, which is not used. Why doesn't the government tabulate what it already has and give that to the industry first, because no government organization, no public sector unit wants to give that land away. Everybody wants to sit on what they have. And I'm not, in that 200,000 hectares, I'm not including railways land or the defense ministry's land. We have no issues about public utility acquisitions. We only have issues about giving it to the industry who just wants to make money.
So Vikram, today, government acquiring for the private sector has no credibility today.
There were a couple of factors in Mohammed Khan's land bill, which I would have thought the government would have been objecting to, which actually have not been objected to. There was actually a clause in there which says, even if there's a private sale, if farmers, as you were saying, if an industry comes and says, I want to buy 200 acres, and you do a negotiated transaction between industry and farmers for 200 acres or 300 acres, what the 2013 LARR says is even that could come under the land acquisition bill, and that is something I've never quite understood. If it's a private, actually, why is it the case? If that's a private transaction, why do you have to get the land acquisition?
For over 100 acres.
I'll explain that.
Why should that be there at all?
When we were originally drafting the bill, it was very clear that many people, even during purchase, don't rehabilitate and resettle those displaced. Oftentimes, the landowners represent a very small fraction of the people who are actually dependent on that land for their livelihood. So, it was felt by almost all concerned that there should be a clause which does not give them compensation, but does give them resettlement and rehabilitation benefits. And the other thing,
if I can just take you up on that, if it's a willing transaction between a willing buyer and a willing seller, why should you get the government into it?
Well, let me explain.
And then I'll ask Sudhanshu why he didn't amend this.
Let me explain it to you quickly why we did this. Firstly, now the sale between X and Y is not affected by the R&R. The R&R is a contract between you and those who are displaced. These could be artisans, these could be sharecroppers, etc. Now, why did we put it in the first place? Because there was a very, very large consensus that you must take care of these people as well, even if it's through private purchase. When we submitted the report to the standing committee, which was headed by Sumitra Mahajanji, rightfully pointed out that, look, you can't set these limits. Leave them to the states. Out of deference to the recommendation
given.
So it was the BJP
who wanted this.
It was the BJP who asked us to leave the limits to the states.
Can I make a small...
The issue was really project affected families. Now, it's not only issue about the landowner.
Vikram, can I make a small point
working
here?
there, the people who are dependent upon the produce.
Yeah.
Now, you might do a private sale. Overnight, those people who are dependent on that land, who are working, are displaced.
Vikram,
now, the owner doesn't take care of that.
Yeah, you're right, but Vikram, one small
reality,
point.
have you seen
This
the
issue is not part of land acquisition. This can be taken care of in your social security welfare
Absolutely.
policies.
So you don't need it in the land
You can
acquisition
look after
bill is
your
what I'm
artisans
saying.
through your social security schemes,
Sudhanshu, now this was, and the reason I'm asking this question very specifically is that after the 2013 Land Acquisition Act had come, if you were speaking to many people in private industry, and they were all saying what you are saying, that look, this is crazy, you can't proceed anymore. But if you ask them specifically what is it that you want done, they say, well, why don't you change this one clause for starters? If you're doing a private purchase, why is then the government getting down our neck? So this is an amendment which you could have perhaps made without the same sort of hue and cry as you're seeing now.
First, those who are opposing at least get this much of credit to BJP government that we took care of the concerns of the farmers. Second thing, what Shergill was saying. Let me complete.
You got a law which says no consent is required. Don't try to
complete this
misinterpret
Absolutely right. There was a political unanimity.
If you had taken a consent, then there was no law required.
Let me complete the sentence.
Entire opportunity to present your objection.
Consent is a fundamental issue.
What changed
Consent is
overnight?
fundamental.
That's why I am saying.
Sudhanshu, I'm asking a simple question. What changed overnight that you changed your stance? Which mega project was being held up that you had to bring this ordinance?
I talk to these industrialists all the time, and from outside the United States, the Indian land situation is blindingly complicated, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, and none of these guys talk about this, is that every land transaction that takes place in India has about half of it in black money.
No, sir.
If you're,
I don't think
come
so.
on, like
Let me
if you try
I'll
to buy a
tell you
house
why.
in
I'll tell you why.
India, people take boatloads
So that's why you
of
can't do
cash.
private
So you
transactions, is
can't
what
do
you're saying.
private transactions, when you're sort of an outside. So it's
See,
very
let me-
difficult. You
No,
don't
let me-
know
let me
who
just
actually
clarify as a
owns the
farmer.
land.
He's saying you
No,
can't
let
do
me
private
let me
transactions.
clarify as a farmer.
There is no tax
fa-
in rural
No, one
agriculture.
second.
So
No,
where is
no
the black money in
farmer,
agriculture?
no farmer who's willingly selling his land objects to being paid by check. Let me just tell you this. It's the company which does not want to pay white money because it wants to save on stamp duty.
Ajit
Farmers have no issue
Gulabchand,
being paid by check.
Ajit Gulabchand, let's try and understand some of the basic. Let's try and lay down what, as we are moving hopefully towards some sort of a consensus on this. One of the things that is being laid out here, which was not there in the 1894 Act, so we should come back to it and saying this is at least one thing which should be a criteria. Let's have a fair price that is paid. If you are forcibly taking away somebody's land, pay them a fair price, pay them a really high price, negotiate deals directly, pay the person the price for land. Land should not be a cheap commodity. I've sometimes had industrialists looking at me and saying, oh, we're going to have to pay so much more for land. But yes, India is a land scarce country. You should pay that fair price. Are you okay with that? Let's pay the fair price so long as there's not too much bureaucracy and complications.
I completely agree. Listen, paying a fair price for a man giving up his land is one thing, and having eminent domain that for a public purpose the land will have to be given up are two different things. So it's important that the price be paid is a fair and a very happy compensation. There's no question about it. The issue comes is with the other complications of permissions from so many people. You know, in India, if you go by the original bill, it would take 10 years for any land to be properly cleared. And this, if nobody goes to court. With so many people going to court, you're not going to get any transactions. And do not forget, we have to create those jobs in the next 20 years. Look at the enormity of the problem. We are squibbling over
so
issues
Ajit, just to understand, so Ajit, hang on. You're saying that is a change that should have come in this bill but hasn't come.
But a lot of them have come, and which, as I said, given the circumstance, they've done a very good job in making it workable.
Okay.
Now, this
we'll debate that further. I don't want to get Shergill Reddy in, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, Consortium of Indian Farmers. Shergill Reddy, your sense on, okay, let's now assume that 1894, one extreme, the 2013, another extreme, what the BJP has done, maybe going back to the first extreme. What sort of a compromise can we have somewhere in the middle of all of this, which makes it an acceptable bill?
Yeah. Firstly, we must understand, and we farmers accept, without industrialization, we cannot progress. I'll give you in agriculture itself, only 6-7% processed. So that we need huge investment in agro-processing industries. Now somebody like maybe some XYZ will come to invest huge money in an interior district in a state in this country. Who is going to deal with hundreds of these farmers with in different social background, political caste consideration? So therefore, my submission is this bill, which has been, modified, by and large meets the aspirations of people. Number one, I'll just take 2-3 points. Secondly, the genuineness of the project has to be done by and large by a government, and if there is a mischief, this can always be questioned. But the other main point, as a farmer, I look to is a very simple thing. No farmer in this country is interested in agriculture. We will be very happy to get rid of it. Now, what I look to is, kindly hear me. What I look is, can I get a genuine real compensation and a rehabilitation package? These three, in my view, are critical, and I have a feeling that the earlier bill, of course, it was made too complex, probably not implementable as already suggested by so many people, but this has simplified. Only two suspicions happen. One is, in spite of all these rules and regulations, whether any mischief can be done by some vested interest in knocking away more than land required by them. That has to be taken care, watched by XYZ. The second is whether we farmers are getting timely rehabilitation and payment.